My brother, the one my parents call their investment, emptied my business account and disappeared to Vegas. They told me to sign the audit papers before I even knew what I was signing. They forgot I had been recording every word for 3 weeks. The call came on a Tuesday morning in November, right when I was in the middle of reviewing vendor invoices for the quarter. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local, so I picked up. Miss Hartley, this is Daniel Cho from Meridian Accounting. We've been engaged to conduct an internal audit of Hartley Custom Millwork. We'll need access to your accounts payable files going back 18 months. Can you come in Thursday? I told him yes, of course, no problem. Then I set down my coffee mug, walked to the window of my apartment, and stared at the street below for a long time. Hartley Custom Millwork was my family's business. My grandfather had built it from nothing in the late 70s, cutting cabinets in a garage in Raleigh, North Carolina. By the time my father took over, it had 15 employees and a solid regional reputation for commercial carpentry. By the time I joined after finishing my accounting degree at NC State, it had 32 employees and contracts with 3 major hotel chains. I had spent 7 years building the financial systems from the ground up. Spreadsheets, software, vendor relationships, payroll. I knew every dollar that moved through that company. Or I thought I did. I called my father back immediately. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he was expecting my call. Dad, why is Meridian doing an internal audit? You didn't tell me. There was a pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. It's routine, he said. The bank requires it for our line of credit renewal. Nothing to worry about. I do the books, Dad. I would know if the bank required. Zoe. His voice dropped. That voice. I had heard it my whole life. It was the voice he used when he was done discussing something. Come to the house Sunday. We'll talk then. I went Sunday. I always went Sunday. That was another thing I should have questioned years ago. My parents' house was a 4-bedroom colonial in Cary, the kind of neighborhood where everyone had a Ring doorbell and strong opinions about HOA landscaping rules. My mother had made pot roast, which she only did when she needed something to do with her hands while delivering bad news. My brother was already there when I arrived. He was sitting at the kitchen island eating a piece of bread, looking like a man who had just come back from a long vacation, which, as it turned out, was not far from the truth. My brother's name is Trevor. He's 26 years old. He has our grandfather's jaw and our father's talent for walking into a room like he owns the furniture. He got a business degree from Wake Forest on our parents' dime, spent 2 years doing consulting work that no one could quite explain, and then 18 months ago, my parents gave him a formal role at the company, VP of Business Development, a title I had seen him bestow upon himself on his LinkedIn profile before my father even announced it to the staff. I had said nothing. I had smiled and congratulated him at the announcement dinner, and then gone home and cried in my car for 20 minutes, which I am not proud of, but which I think any reasonable person would understand. Sit down, honey, my mother said, setting a bowl of green beans on the table. I sat. Trevor didn't look at me. That was the first real sign. My father came in from the back porch, wiping his hands on a dish towel, and sat at the head of the table. He looked tired in a specific way, the way people look when they've been rehearsing something in their head for too long. We have a situation, he said. The situation, as it was explained to me over the next 40 minutes, was this. Trevor had been managing several vendor relationships over the past year as part of his new role. Some payments had been made to those vendors that were, in my father's careful phrasing, structured in a way that may raise questions during the audit. The amounts were significant. My father would not say the exact number, but based on the way my mother was gripping her fork, I guessed it was not small. How significant? I asked. That's not the point right now, my father said. It is absolutely the point. Zoe. That voice again. What we need to focus on is Thursday's audit meeting. Meridian is going to ask who authorized those payment approvals. The documentation shows your signature on the release forms. I set down my fork. My signature? I said slowly. You signed off on the quarterly vendor payments. You always do. I signed bundled approval packets. Trevor told me those vendors were for the Nashville hotel project. And they were, Trevor said, still not looking at me. Partially. Partially. Some of the capital was reallocated. I looked at my father. Reallocated where? My father folded his hands on the table. He had the expression of a man doing something he genuinely believed was the only option available, which is the most dangerous kind of expression a parent can wear. So, you are the CFO of record. Your name is on those approvals. If the audit finds irregularities, the liability follows the signature. The room went very quiet. You want me to take responsibility for Trevor's fraud, I said. We want you to manage the narrative, my mother said, and I genuinely could not believe those words had just come out of her mouth. Trevor finally looked up. He had the decency to look uncomfortable, but not enough decency to speak. Think about what happens if this becomes a criminal matter, my father said, leaning forward. Trevor has a fiancée. They're getting married in April. He has no financial safety net. You have your savings, your certifications. You could take a leave, let things settle. You're asking me to let the auditors think I misappropriated company funds, I said. That's not a narrative. That's fraud. You're a CPA, you can manage the audit. Ask for more time, redirect the questions. You know these systems better than anyone. Trevor doesn't even know how to. That is not my problem. It is your family, my mother said, and her voice cracked on the last word in a way that 6 months ago would have gutted me. You have always been the strong one. We need you to be strong right now. I looked at Trevor. He was staring at the table. How much? I asked him directly. He finally answered, 83,000. I pushed back my chair and picked up my coat. I'll see you Thursday, I said to no one in particular, and I walked out. On the drive home, I thought about all the Sundays I had driven to that house and left feeling like I had been hired help that was only welcome at the family table. I thought about my grandfather, who had built that company with actual calluses on his actual hands and who had, when he died 6 years ago, left a clause in his will that the business should remain a family trust in fair and equal measure among his descendants. I thought about the 7 years I had given to that place, the payroll system I had overhauled, the bank relationship I had cultivated, the line of credit I had negotiated. And then I thought about something I had done 3 weeks ago, almost by accident. I had been working late on a Thursday, alone in the office after the accounting staff had left, when I found an outgoing wire transfer in the system that I didn't recognize. It was for $12,000, flagged under a vendor name I had never processed before. I had pulled up the authorization trail and found Trevor's login, but the secondary approval showed my credentials, which I had never entered. That was the night I understood that someone had either cloned my login or physically used my workstation to push approvals through under my name. I did not confront Trevor. I did not tell my father. I had learned over 7 years that doing either of those things would result in a conversation in which I was made to feel I was overreacting. Instead, I did something quiet. I went into the company's internal communication platform. We used a software called Lattice for team updates and project tracking, which also had an audio logging feature for recorded check-in meetings. I enabled automatic session recording on the executive conference channel, which covered any meeting held by senior leadership. I set it to archive to the company's cloud storage automatically. I also filed a silent tip with the NC Secretary of State's Business Registration Division, flagging potential irregularities in vendor disbursements for their awareness. Not a formal complaint, just a flag. Then I waited. I did not know what I was waiting for exactly. I think part of me hoped I was wrong. Sunday night, after the pot roast and the reallocated funds and my mother's cracked voice, I went home and opened my laptop. I logged into the Lattice archive. There were 11 recorded sessions over the past 3 weeks. Most were routine project updates, but there was one from 2 Thursdays ago labeled X6 Sync BD Flash Finance. I had not been invited to that meeting. I had not known it existed. I pressed play. My father's voice came through first, clear and unhurried. He was talking about the audit timeline. Then Trevor's voice, going through the vendor list, then something that made me sit up straighter. If Meridian pulls a full approval chain, Zoe's credentials are on everything, Trevor said. She won't even know which ones to flag. She'll figure it out eventually, my father said. By then the audit is over. She'll be upset. She's always upset about something. A pause. She'll handle it. She always handles everything. Then my father's voice again, measured and certain. She's the CFO of record. Whatever the audit finds, it follows her title. We can position it as an oversight. Stress. She's been under a lot of pressure. You think she'll go along with it? Another pause. She loves this company, my father said. She'll protect it. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark for a long time. They had not made a mistake in a moment of panic. They had planned this. They had sat in that conference room 2 weeks before the audit was even announced to me and discussed exactly how my name, my credentials, my 7 years of trust building would be used as a firewall between Trevor and the consequences of what he had done. They had decided in a meeting I wasn't invited to that I would handle it. The next morning, I called a friend from my NC State days who was now a forensic accountant. I explained what I had found without using the company name. She told me that if I was sitting on recorded evidence of a conspiracy to commit audit fraud, I needed to talk to a lawyer before I talked to anyone else, including the auditors. I called a lawyer that afternoon. His name was Paul, and he had a very calm voice and a very direct way of telling me things I did not want to hear. If you walk into that audit room Thursday and don't disclose what you know, you become part of the cover-up, he said. And if I do disclose it, then you're a whistleblower, which is not a comfortable position to be in, but it's a defensible one. I asked him what I should bring. He told me. I spent Wednesday night putting everything together. Thursday morning, I woke up early. I showered, put on the grey blazer I wore when I needed to feel like my own person, and drove to the Meridian offices in downtown Raleigh. My father's car was already in the parking lot. Trevor's was beside it. The conference room had that particular corporate neutrality that makes everything feel procedural and inevitable. Daniel Cho from Meridian was there, along with a senior partner and a woman I didn't recognize who turned out to be from the company's legal counsel. My father sat on one side of the table. Trevor was beside him in a jacket I had never seen before. The kind people buy when they want to look like someone who doesn't need to worry. My father looked at me when I walked in and gave me a small, certain nod, the nod of a man who has already decided how the scene ends. I sat down across from him. Mr. Cho opened the meeting with an overview of the scope. He listed the payment categories under review. He named the vendor accounts. He got to the approval chain and looked up. Miss Hartley, as CFO of record, your credentials appear on the authorization trail for several of these disbursements. Can you walk us through your approval process for vendor payments in this category? My father's foot moved slightly under the table, a subtle pressure point. I opened the folder in front of me. I can, I said, but before I do, I need to submit something to the record. The room shifted. I have a recording, I said, of a senior leadership meeting held 3 weeks ago in which the fraud currently under review was discussed, along with a deliberate plan to use my credentials and my role as a mechanism to deflect auditor attention. The legal counsel woman sat up very straight. I also have the original authorization trail showing the timestamp discrepancies that prove my credentials were used from a workstation I was not logged into at the time of the approvals. I slid copies across the table. And I have a preliminary flag I filed with the Secretary of State's office 18 days ago, establishing that I had concerns prior to this audit being announced. The room was completely silent. My father's face had gone the color of old concrete. Zoe, he said. His voice was very quiet. What are you doing? It wasn't a question. I'm answering Mr. Cho's question, I said. Trevor stood up. You're mischaracterizing what was said in that meeting. You were not there. You cannot just. I have the audio, I said simply. The legal counsel woman put her hand up toward Trevor and he stopped talking. Mr. Cho looked at me. then at my father, then at his senior partner. Some kind of professional communication passed between them in the space of 2 seconds. "We're going to need to pause and bring in additional parties," the senior partner said. "I'll be contacting the State Bureau of Investigation." My father pushed back his chair. "This is a family matter and I will not sit here and be." "Mr. Hartley," the legal councilwoman said very calmly, "I would strongly recommend you not leave this room without speaking to your attorney." I watched my father sit back down. I watched him age 10 years in that chair. Trevor was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger, something closer to the realization that the floor he had been standing on was not actually floor. I looked back at him and felt almost nothing. Not satisfaction, exactly. More like the particular quiet that comes after a very long noise finally stops. The next 4 months were not simple or clean. Legal processes never are, regardless of what crime dramas suggest. There were depositions and document reviews, and a period in which I was technically suspended from the company pending investigation, which was humiliating in its own specific way. My mother called me twice in that period, once to cry, once to tell me I had destroyed the family. I did not respond to the second call in any way that I am proud of, but I did respond. The SBI investigation found $83,000 in fraudulent disbursements, all traced to Trevor's Bender accounts. It also found 2 earlier instances, smaller amounts from the previous fiscal year that I had not known about. The total was $112,000. Trevor agreed to a plea deal: felony embezzlement, restitution, probation, no prison time, which I had complicated feelings about, but which Paul told me was a realistic outcome given the cooperation. My father was not charged criminally. The recording established that he had known and had attempted to conceal, but the DA determined that proving criminal intent versus negligent oversight would be difficult to sustain. He did, however, resign from the company. The bank withdrew the line of credit pending restructuring. The board, which consisted of my father, an uncle, and a family friend who had always been vaguely terrified of my father, voted to bring in outside management. Then, 8 weeks after the SBI investigation closed, I received a letter from a law firm in Durham. My grandfather had set up the business trust with what Paul later called an unusually specific moral conduct clause. If any primary trustee or officer was found to have engaged in fraudulent conduct against the company, their ownership interest reverted to the remaining beneficiaries in good standing. My father's interest, per the clause, transferred to me. Combined with my existing share, I was now the majority stakeholder of Hartley Custom Millwork. I read that letter 4 times in the parking lot of a Panera Bread because that is where I happened to be when it arrived by email. I did not cry. I sat in my car and ate a bowl of soup and felt something settle in my chest that I realized after a few minutes was the specific weight of a thing that had been decided a long time ago finally arriving at its correct conclusion. I went back to the company 6 months later, not as CFO of record, but as majority owner with a new general manager I hired myself. I kept 28 of the 32 employees. The 4 I let go were people Trevor had hired, who had, it turned out, known more than they had ever indicated. I do not speak to my father. I do not know if that is permanent. Some days I think it isn't. Other days I think it has to be, at least for now. My mother and I are in the careful early stages of figuring out what we are to each other without him in the middle of it, which is slower work than I expected but not impossible. Trevor got married in April as planned. I was not invited to the wedding, which is fine. I sent a card that said congratulations and nothing else, because I am a person who was raised with manners, and despite everything, I intend to keep them. The company turned a profit in the second quarter after I came back. Not a large one, but real. 32-year-old cabinets in a garage in Raleigh, and they are still standing. I think my grandfather would have had opinions about all of this. I think he would have been angrier than I was, and louder about it, and then eventually he would have gotten back to work. That's what I try to do most mornings. I get back to work. I know where everything is. I built the systems myself. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes not from working hard, but from spending years making yourself smaller so someone else can look bigger. I know that exhaustion well. I lived inside it for a long time without even having a name for it. What my father did, and what my brother allowed, wasn't just financial fraud. It was something older and quieter than that. It was the assumption, built over years of Sunday dinners and unspoken family rules, that I would absorb whatever needed absorbing, that my competence made me useful and my loyalty made me safe to use. The $83,000 was just the moment that assumption finally showed its full shape. I think about cause and effect a lot now. Not in a dramatic way, but in the plain, practical sense that actions tend to produce outcomes that match them. My brother spent years taking shortcuts in school, in work, in accountability. And each time someone covered for him, the next shortcut got a little bigger. My parents spent years making decisions based on who they wanted Trevor to be rather than who he actually was. Those choices compounded quietly, the way financial irregularities do, until the number was too large to hide, and the only solution they could imagine was to hand it to me. What I had going for me in the end wasn't luck. It was that I had spent 7 years doing the actual work. I knew the systems because I built them. I knew the approval chain because I designed it. When I found that wire transfer on a Thursday night in an empty office, I understood immediately what I was looking at. Not because I was suspicious by nature, but because I had paid attention for years when it would have been easier not to. That's the thing about doing things the right way even when no one is watching. It turns out you're building something, even when you can't see what it is yet. I also think about the 3 weeks between finding that transfer and walking into the Meridian conference room. I could have done nothing. I could have told myself I was probably wrong, or that the family fallout wasn't worth it, or that Trevor would eventually face his own consequences without my involvement. Those would have been comfortable things to believe. Instead, I enabled the recording, I filed the quiet flag with the Secretary of State, and I called a lawyer. None of those things felt brave at the time. They felt like small, anxious decisions made by someone who wasn't entirely sure she was doing the right thing. But they were right, and I knew they were right, and I did them anyway. That gap between knowing what's right and actually doing it when it costs something is where I think character actually lives. Not in the easy moments. In the ones where the easier path is right there, and you choose the harder one anyway because you can't make yourself be the kind of person who doesn't. My grandfather built a company with his hands in a garage in Raleigh. I don't think he expected it to end up in a deposition room in downtown Raleigh 40 years later, but I think he would have recognized the work, the real work, the kind that doesn't get shortcuts. I'm trying to honor that. Some days it's easier than others. But the company is still standing, and so am I.